Hey, this is Chuck Marshall with Wani, and I'm talking to David Ellefson from Megadeth. David, how are you doing, man?
Great. How are you?
I am doing good. So I never, I should say, I never cease to be amazed with the number of gigs you have going on. Your latest adventure has you out on the road meeting with fans doing an interactive storytelling-based clinic called Basstory. I love the idea of appealing to your entire fan base, including musicians, as well as folks that want to hear about your adventures in music and life. Do you have a set format for each of the encounters, or are you trying to personalize each one based on fan input?
I personalize them. You know, it's one of these situations where I can walk in and kind of read the room and be a little improvisational with it.
Uh-huh.
I mean, granted, there's a bit of a repertoire that I have of songs and discussions and certain things, but I like to just let these things have their own sort of natural pulse. I think when you come in as a band, you've got your set list, you do your act, you do your thing, and that's what people expect.
Yeah.
I think with this, to have it be improvisational and have there be moments that are intuitive, that's part of the fun, part of the charm of the whole Basstory event.
That's cool. That sounds really awesome. So the western leg of Basstory has you flying solo. Then on the Midwest leg, you pick up the awesome power thrash of Green Deth and Wrath, opening up those shows. What led to pulling in those bands for the Midwest leg?
Well, as we were talking about launching this, I wanted to try to include as many of the family members as possible. And in this case, EMP, combat bands, Ellefson Coffee, bringing my whole life and my whole cachet of everything that I have together as one night out.
Awesome.
Sort of like an intimate evening with David Ellefson kind of thing.
That's cool.
And also to offer, one of the hardest things for bands is, we sign them to the label, for instance, and then if they're really going to actually sell any units, especially if they're rock, metal bands, is they have to be on the road, they have to be touring. So then comes the next hardest part, which is how do we get a tour? Well, that's why we formed the Ellefson Touring Agency called ETA. And that is the entity that's actually booking Basstory for me. And they're also booking a lot of the acts on our label. And so that's why we're putting them in. So we've got EMP, ETA, Ellefson Coffee, Basstory, all kind of wrapped into one on this thing.
Awesome. That's really cool. Yeah, because I know that's a struggle for a lot of bands that are starting out, is to figure out, how to get gigs outside of their local markets. So is that is ETA like going to target like small bands that are emerging, or are you going to like just work with the combat label? How's that going to work out?
We're going to do both. The whole purpose of everything that I do is to always try to just be helpful to help other people. The label initially was put together to launch Dollskin because I was the earliest believer, so I basically built a whole infrastructure to make that happen. And as a result, not only did we help break some young new bands, but we started to work with bands like Autograph and Mark Slaughter and Doyle, legacy artists who were putting art albums out, who still have a lot of mileage in their careers. And we found a nice niche in the business, in our industry, that we really serve those kind of artists very well with our infrastructure. Same thing with ETA is young bands who need to get on tours, finding ways and methods that we can get them on shows, on tours, and to help, again, perpetuate their career, to help sell records. And, because as always with these things is you're walking around the industry with your tin cup out, practically begging people hat in hand to listen to your band and, hey, can we get a record deal? Hey, will you book us? Hey, will you manage us? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And I think, in our wheelhouse, we try to be a sort of full service entity that does all of that. And it's a lot of work. And again, we require the artists to do their share. I mean, there's no free lunches here. No one's going to be able to sit back while Dave and Tom do all the work. Like, that ain't going to happen, But at the same time, if I can use the wide swath that I've been blessed with in my career to sort of knock down some doors and help walk some people in the room behind me, I'm happy to do it. And certainly Green Death and Wrath are two of those bands on Combat. They make sense in that region. We're going to actually start to do that. And even down in Texas, James Rivera from Hellstar is going to be a part of those events as well.
Oh,
and he's
awesome.
been a long-time friend of mine since, like, the Peace Cells tour.
Yeah.
His way back then. And his band, Hellstar, they're on Combat. So, we've got a really nice reach here into a lot of artists, and this is an opportunity not only for me to go out and tell some stories of my life. I always think the conversation's more fun when you can bring your friends into it.
That's awesome. So I noticed that Basstory has not yet booked a show in Detroit, and I'm wondering what the hell's up with that, because I'm in Detroit and I can't get to Basstory. Are you going to come out my way?
Well, now that you mention it, I will bring it up to my agent. I happen to know the agent because he works for me. So.
All right. Yeah. I'm being selfish and thinking to myself, but I know there's plenty of fans out in Michigan that would love to see you.
Well, thank you. And the truth of it is actually there's Basstory is now, we're realizing is something we can do all around the world.
Yeah.
And it's we're actually working on overseas dates right now, even other regions of the United States. And it's really a good timing to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a nice, just point in my life and my musical career where it's cool, and we get to, you want to see Megadeth, you come out, you get to see us on the biggest stages, in the coolest shows around the world. And then what I found by doing clinics and spoken word stuff is that there's this time where fans can be one-on-one. I love the Q&A aspect of it because, quite honestly, the fans ask me the best questions.
Yeah.
And I'd rather listen to them ask a question and me retort because, it's just kind of like this 35 years of Megadeth right now. I'm seeing these fans are pulling out the coolest photos.
That's awesome.
Across social media. I mean, they're just incredible. And that's where I started this hashtag, Every Bass Has a Story, because I started seeing these pictures of these old basses. And when I look at old Megadeth records, and then I listen to them and I read the liner notes, or I'll see an old photo that, has a bass or, some of the situation in it. To me, I was like, there's stories in these guitars. There's stories in these basses. And that's really what the impetus of Basstory was. It was this hashtag I did on Instagram called Every Bass Has a Story. I just realized, there's a story, that one picture, that one bass, there's probably 10 other things that were happening in that moment that I can tell the story about that are just fascinating to most fans. Kind of the same way when I read old Kiss books. Right. Or I would look at old pictures in, Rock Scene and Cream magazine where, backstage with Keith Richards, and in the background, it would say Jimmy Page and Paul McCartney look on, and all these famous rock stars in the room. And I realized, I'm now that guy. And my generation, we are those bands. We were there now, and the legacy of, the Big Four, Megadeth, the people that were in and around our lives back in those days. It's such a fun conversation even for me to have. It's just an awesome platform for storytelling now. Yeah,
it sounds great. So I'm hoping you can get something out in our way. That would be fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of storytelling, your next memoir, More Life with Deth, is coming out in November, and I've read that you're covering that period where you weren't actually in Megadeth. Did writing that, this book open up any old wounds for you, or was it more cathartic?
It was a little bit of both. And I had to kind of look at, when a wound is opened, there's two participants in any resentment.
Right. Right.
One of them being me. And fortunately, I've been raised through my sort of drug and alcohol recovery, if you will, that, there's disciplines that you have to maintain, and there are introspective honesties that are required to come to terms with things. And, I think maybe in writing a memoir, you're sort of forced to go back down some roads that maybe you thought you kind of could conveniently just sort of set aside. And, you know, honestly, I've come to terms with all that stuff even years ago. So it's not like it scratches some old wound, and I see a lot of memoirs are probably the first time certain people have actually ever even revisited those periods of their life. Fortunately for me, I've revisited them many times over the years, so it's not like it's a fresh wound, and it's not even like an old wound that got opened. It's, you know, my old wounds are pretty, I'd say are healed, you know. And I think, you know, knowing that, it's important now to make sure moving forward to not cut open fresh wounds. And, you know, I think it's one of the things when you're in any setting, certainly a rock band where you've been, you know, creatively involved, business, all the other things, you know, emotionally involved as just brothers, you know, you know, you're going to have stuff. There's going to be stuff there, you know. And I think that period, if anything for me, I think that period that I had away from Megadeth were some of my most memorable, challenging, but probably most rewarding years of my life. Because it forced me out of the nest where I had to, it was either fly or die. And those are the moments when I think you're really faced with, you know, I think largely you're faced with faith because you have no other option. You know, you have no other option than to just go, holy shit, I hope this works. You know, sometimes that's the prayer, you know. And again, I've been pretty open about faith and religion, but believe me, I'm a guy who, you know, I talk very casually to God, like, you know, what the fuck? Like, you know, why now? You know, those are my prayers, you know. and I think in doing that, you know, I have an honest dialogue with my creator, you know, and what I'm always faced with is, you know, chill out. I got this. Just, you know, go, I got you, you know, and so then the prayer kind of becomes, all right, lead me where you need, you know, and then, you know, and I think it's in that subservient submission, and I, you know, what I realized is when Megadeth ended was, oh my God, this is this moment where I have to put the bass down. I'll never be able to play music again. I'm going to have to go get a day job, cut my hair. I'm going to have to grow up and finally be that guy, you know, and that's just me in my very glass half empty, you know, the end of the world, the other shoe's going to drop, thinking that kind of, you know, is part of my fabric to some degree. And what I realized through that process is, no, you don't have to put the bass down. Like, you know, it's almost like the creator said, look, I gave you the bass for a reason. Like, it's a talent I gave you. I want you to use it. You just may not be using it in Megadeth right now. And only for right now. Maybe later, you know. And I kind of came to another realization that, you know, there's three answers that the good Lord sends down. Yes, not now. I got something better in store. And it really forced me to come to terms with just living in the moment. And every day was sort of like, well, let me open up the email and turn on the phone and let's see what life's got for me today. And it really forced me into a one day at a time, you know, mindset. And, you know, through it, I ended up doing a lot of great work in the corporate world. I ended up going back to college and getting a degree. Which I still haven't had to use for a job, you know, but the education of it and the process of it was really cool.
Because that serves
and
you.
Training my mind how to think different was very cool. And through this process, I made a ton of records. I did a bunch of, you know, shows. I had whole new opportunities so that when the day came for me to return back to Megadeth, suddenly I was this newer, healthier, stronger, more vibrant, resilient, and creative person. And I think I brought something really good back to Megadeth in the front view rather than, I think lots of times people go, oh, we're going to have to go back in time and revisit the past. And quite honestly, we haven't revisited the past. We've only moved forward, and it's really been an incredible journey for all of us.
So let's talk a little bit about new music. You've got Metal Allegiance 2 coming out, the Power Drunk Majesty, on September the 7th. You got a show at the Gramercy on September 6th with some of my favorite vocalists like John Bush and Bobby Blitz. Are you going to go on tour with Metal Allegiance to support the new album?
There are some shows, and what we found with Metal Allegiance is that it's largely been a kind of an all-star event kind of band, which that's one side of it, the live aspect, and then the other, and which very much speaks to the allegiance of the metal community, right. Which is really at the kind of the heart and soul of it. It's just, you know, I would say it's good friends making great music together. And then there's this other side now where, you know, we've made 2 records together, and 2 records, and even there was even a covers EP that the guys did just to honor fallen heroes at the time, Glenn Frey and Wani and things like that. And that was just kind of a little covers EP. But as the original artist, it's cool to see what we can create as one voice together, because we come from such radical backgrounds. Yeah. And we're kind of an unlikely pairing of certainly the core 4 of us writing together, of genres, age groups, and all the different things that come together. That it's very different. And then to hear what we come up with together is just sort of a collective consciousness, I should say, is super cool. And, you know, that's the fun of stretching out with your friends and digging into your creative bag to see what you come up with. And so far, I think we've made 2 really compelling records. And we limited the guests a little bit on this one. The last one was pretty wide, and it was fun to just have as many people as we could. One of the things is we didn't want to just repeat it, because we wanted the album to have, you know, a new interest, and, you know, not just sort of repeat everybody. And also, and not just to repeat because we didn't want to invite somebody back, but because we wanted to also invite some new people, like John Bush, Johan from Amon Amarth, and, you know, Floor from Nightwish, and, you know, kind of expand. We kind of really, this one seemed to tip a lot more even over into the European talent pool, which was very cool on this album.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear it. So, Dave, I heard that Megadeth will be putting out new music in 2019. Is that true?
That's the goal.
That's the goal? Awesome.
You know, I think we learned with Dystopia that, you know, we're at a point in our career where we can still make really compelling new music, but it's also important to take our time and really make it as great as we possibly can. And I say that because when I came back to the band, I came in during the Endgame album, which is a really strong album. And there was a sense of renewed urgency and passion when we made the 13 album. We were doing the big 4 shows. We only had about 10 weeks to crank this record out, and it was fun because it sort of hung our feet to the fire, and you can feel there's a really good energy about the album. And we're all excited because there was big touring behind that, the Mayhem Tour, Big 4, all these things. Yeah. But by the time we got the Super Collider, you know, that was an album that wasn't as focused. It was a album that was done in more of a hurry. There were tour dates booked in the summer. I think we felt boxed in a bit on that album, and suddenly we were making an album on a schedule. A second time when we really needed some more time to breathe. And Super Collider's got some great tracks on it. I'm not discounting it as an album. It's got some really cool stuff on it. But I just think as a group, it took its toll on us. And, you know, obviously as the group sort of dismantled and then, you know, remounted again for what became Dystopia, you know, there was a process there that I think now with Megadeth, I think we're there now where we've recalibrated things to really honor and respect our legacy and know what our fans like And you don't just make records only for your fans. You have to make records also for you as the creator of them.
Uh-huh.
But I think it helps sort of recalibrate to us that which is really at the core and the heart of Megadeth. Right. And, there's some things that we all write that are really, really good, but they're just not right for Megadeth. And that goes for every one of us in the band. Yeah. And I think for me, it's been helpful to have things like Metal Allegiance, to have things like, me and Frank Bellows, Altitudes and Attitude, and have a few other outlets on the side that allow me to express this sort of other tones of my voice that are not Megadeth. Yeah. And even Metal Allegiance, as much as it's a metal record,
Yeah, it's not the same.
It's not the same. Megadeth has a very narrow window of what is Megadeth and what should be Megadeth. And, I think we found the epicenter of that again on Dystopia.
Yeah. And so that kind of falls into my question I had related to the Megadeth sound. Do you ever feel like that you are getting boxed in with the sound of Megadeth, and that you don't have the freedom to kind of go off of whatever mood you and Dave are thinking about as far as new music for the band?
No, I think we've gone pretty wide with it, Mm-hmm. When you look at, certainly the extreme was Risk, I think, admittedly so. And, even Cryptic Writings, that was a whole different age and period and time of rock music and metal music, and thrash was, really just pushed back down into the extreme underground.
Yeah.
We discovered this whole other melodic musical side of Megadeth that, we felt compelled to really bring up to the surface and really push out there. And it was cool. It was just a different side of us. But, then as time went on, we internally felt like, especially after the Risk album, we felt like, man, we have really ventured off we've sort of lost the plot and we've gotten way off the course here,
right.
And of course a lot of fans were going, what the hell, where's our mighty Megadeth, where did they go? And we listened, we paid attention. And again, the fans, if nothing else, become a barometer to us internally too. Of course, look, a concert's always more fun when there's a lot of fans who love what you do. I'm not gonna lie, it's always fun. But at the same time, you can't just always please them. You have to, internally feel like you've made a great record that you feel really good about. And I think every record we have done that, but there was this period of time as we're heading into the 2000s, where, it was time to really get it back to its core of what it was. And that's hard, man, because, you're not, at that point we were in our 30s, heading into our 40s, we weren't the same young little 21, 23-year-olds who wrote, Killing Is My Business and He Sells, you're just not that guy anymore, so I think, looking back on it, especially as we look at Dystopia was this point where we went back and really honored the truth of what Megadeth was at its origin, yet we made no bones that it was, at the time, 2016, and it's a new day for Megadeth, too. Yeah. And, part of it, too, is the technology. When I go back, I listen to P-Cells, and those records were real raw because that was the technology in the day. Everything was analog. The quality of our equipment. We were poor. We didn't have really great equipment. And, we hadn't even got signed to Capitol yet when we made when we made P-Cells. We were still in combat. So we were just, flying by the seat of our pants and, just scraping by, Yet what you don't hear in the technology, you certainly hear in the angst and the emotion of the album. And, and it's kind of funny because Dystopia was a lot like P-Cells. We were down to nothing. It was me and Dave. There was, at one point, didn't even have management. We were in the transition. Didn't even have a band. We were in a transition. It's ironic that, we had to get it back down to nothing to build something really incredible up, just like we did on P-Cells and even on Rust in Peace, quite honestly.
Yeah, you had to strip it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Dave, I just have one last question for you. I asked you. I've talked to you before about what you like for breakfast, so I'm good there. The next debate question is pineapple on pizza or no?
Oh yeah, I love it. I love Hawaiian pizza. Yeah, Hawaiian, and because I grew up on a farm, so ham and bacon is always good. You know what I mean? So pineapple pizza is good. I'm definitely a West Coast guy. I love Hawaii, so bring it on.
Awesome, man. So, David, it was great to talk with you. Really appreciate it.
Yep, awesome. Good to chat. See ya. Bye.
All right, take care.